What's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast, the show dedicated to true basketball fans, giving you unfiltered, intellectual takes on the game we all love. If you like what you hear, consider subscribing to the show here on YouTube or wherever you can find a podcast. I'm your host, Hani, and joining me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
All right, man. We are still within the dry period of the NBA offseason. August is typically the month where executives go on their vacations. Players are sort of starting to ramp up their workouts. You're seeing a bit of workouts, kind of videos surface online.
We have FIBA this year. So.
And FIBAs are going on. Most recently, the Rico Hines runs have started up again, so we do have some content from that. It was actually very good content last season as well. Yeah. You know, with the type of runs that were going on.
Unfortunately, it was all fake.
Yeah. There was a lot of hype built up for our Raptors, and that did not end well for us. But we are ignoring that reality. But typically, this time of year is pretty chill in terms of news, and there's not much going on, except the fact that the NBA is a reality show, basically, and anything could happen at any time. And in this case, there was a video surfacing from China. A lot of things are made in China, but in this particular situation, beef was made in China.
Exactly.
It was absolutely started there. And so James Harden basically was going on an Adidas tour in China and decided, you know what? I'm on camera. I'm being recorded by a bunch of people. Let me publicly trash my president of basketball operations, call him a liar, and let me also reiterate the fact that I will never play for a team that Daryl Morey is working for ever again. And he said it twice. He didn't just say it once. He said it twice within the clip.
He made sure everyone heard it.
Oh yeah, he made sure his intentions perfectly clear. Now, this has sparked the conversation about the player empowerment movement and how James Harden is not the only player to have done that. Now, he has asked for a trade 3 times over the last 5 years, but other players have also done similar acts where it's gotten to a point now where a player can basically dictate exactly what they want to do and where they want to go. They can, if they don't like the current situation that they're in, they can ask out, and eventually they'll have to get traded because ultimately, you know, the players essentially run the league. They get paid a ton of money, and they can do things like James Harden. They can publicly criticize their GM. They can not play well. They can bust out a fat suit here and there.
And I think for us, the point of this episode is that it's not just James Harden, as Hani mentioned. It's been a constant cycle for the last, well, what can we say, like 7 years or so?
At least like almost a decade, yeah.
You know, they've coined it the player empowerment era. I think it's been a controversial era, no doubt, for a lot of people. Obviously, for the players, it's being looked at as, I think, a positive thing across the players' union. But, you know, in terms of organizations and in terms of fans, I think it's looked at a little bit differently, which was what the point of this episode was.
Yeah, so we wanted to kind of, because James Harden sparked this conversation, we wanted to kind of look at the player empowerment era as a whole and really look at it in the terms of, has it ruined the NBA or has it actually been a good thing for the NBA?
And so starting us off with a little bit of an intro, a little bit of a history lesson with a timeline, we just want to set the stage of where we are now in the NBA, and what are the events that have led us to this point. Obviously, before we talk about the Big Three situation in 2010, we just want to highlight a couple of examples that actually happened pre-2010. We obviously all, know this era to have started arguably with the formation of the Big Three in Miami in 2010. But there have been a couple of instances of, we can say, quote-unquote, player empowerment in previous eras. I think the first main example is the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar trade to the Los Angeles Lakers in 1975, where he dictated that he wanted to go to LA from Milwaukee. Now, granted, this situation was a little bit different compared to the rest of the situations we're going to talk about, mainly because of the obviously racial, societal issues that were going on, and particularly related to Kareem. But I think that was basically the first example that really dictated, what power a player could have in the NBA. In 2004, obviously, we know Vince Carter basically quit on the Toronto Raptors and got himself traded to the New Jersey Nets. And I think that was an example of, he didn't dictate where he went, but he basically gave up on his team. And he straight up quit for the team that he was playing for. So I think that was a very noteworthy example.
Very similar to what James Harden did on his way out of Houston. Basically kind of dogged it on his way out. And again, at the end of the day, I love Vince. Loved what he ever did for the Raptors. But man, that one moment is something that is still it's still a very sour spot for Raptor fans.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who were around for that era still have not forgiven him. I don't know if they ever will, because that was really one of the clear-cut first examples, at least in basketball, of a player straight up quitting, which has been kind of starting to be a trend now. But
Well, the most public, I would say.
exactly. Obviously, we talked about, I think, the starting point, the catalyst for a lot of this being the 2010 formation of the Miami Heat Big Three with LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and D Wade. Now, some have also argued the Boston Celtics, but again, that was more from the perspective of the team building, I think, which is not what we're focusing on. Granted, that did have a lot to do with someone like KG vetoing his no trade request or no trade clause. But I think that was from another perspective. Oftentimes, people have also mentioned the 2016 Warriors with summer of 2016 Warriors with KD joining them. But I think again that was a situation where one player wanted to go to a team, and again the salary cap just worked out for that. But I think, as we can all agree, I think the catalyst for a lot of us for this era is the formation of the Big Three in Miami.
Well, I mean, I would say this. Now, yes, were they free agents? Yes. They absolutely had every right to go to wherever destination they wanted to go. I think the way they formulated it, where LeBron and Bosh and Wade basically sat in a room and were like, you know what, let's all end up signing in Miami. And yeah, then it ended up happening that way. Now, again, you can argue similar situation for KD. He's a free agent. He can go to wherever he wants to go. But the optics of going to a team, a 73-9 team that just beat you in the Western Conference Finals, I believe erased a 3-1 deficit to beat you in the Western Conference Finals, was what, shifted the balance of power in the NBA. Especially considering how KD is as a person. But yeah, I would say the Big Three, in terms of that power move that LeBron, Wade, and Bosh kind of cultivated, really did open the doors to what we saw later on.
Well, I mean, speaking of the Big Three, it wasn't even supposed to be Bosh originally in 2007 when this whole idea came up. It was supposed to be Carmelo Anthony, which is why Chris Bosh, D Wade, and LeBron all signed their contracts to expire at the same time. Carmelo ended up taking a longer contract, which is why in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, that's when he demanded the trade to the New York Knicks. And that was, again, one of the first examples, I think, in recent history where a star essentially, publicly trashed the team that he was on and dictated that I want to go to one specific team and one specific team only, which was the New York Knicks. Now, he ended up getting his trade request fulfilled. But again, there's a reason why Denver fans hate him to this day, and there's a reason why 15 will always belong to Nikola Jokic now.
I mean,
also that Carmelo Anthony,
and also that Jokic won a championship, something that Melo never did in his career. But yeah, I would say this is very similar to what we're going to talk about in recent times now, where he basically said, "Hey, I want to go to this particular team," and it also was a perfect example of why teams should be cautious about fulfilling these requests, and why the team that's trading or acquiring that player is usually at a disadvantage in those situations.
I mean, well, it ended up working out quite well for Denver, I think, in this situation.
Well, I'm talking about for New York.
But yeah, for New York, they had some success in the beginning, but it obviously didn't end up working out long term. Couple more examples we want to highlight, starting off with 2018, Kawhi Leonard. Now, this was a bit different than the rest of the examples because Kawhi was actually injured. But the whole situation surrounding his injury, plus the involvement of his uncle Dennis, obviously we remember Tony Parker basically calling Kawhi a liar in terms of the injury he had. And so this was a very, I think, interesting example. And we're going to talk about load management as well in this episode. But this was, I think, the intro for a lot of fans in terms of what load management was. And I think, a quiet superstar like Kawhi Leonard wielding this kind of power, I think opened a lot of people's eyes in terms of what players as a whole could do in this league. Because, obviously we know the LeBrons, the Carmelos, but for a guy like Kawhi Leonard to do what he did, I think really set a precedent in the league.
Yeah, I think for Kawhi, he wanted out of San Antonio because of the way he felt that he was being treated there, which, I mean, you can argue on both sides, because at the end of the day, Kawhi is so quiet and the Spurs are so tight-lipped. We will never know the true story of that situation. But ultimately, Kawhi ended up in Toronto, and I think after that, he played the one season in Toronto, and he went to exactly where he wanted to go. He went to LA. He went to the Clippers, and that piggybacks onto the next player that we got to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. Paul George, after signing his extension with OKC, Once Kawhi Leonard headed to the Clippers, Paul George said, hey, I want to go to the Clippers to join up with Kawhi. And that trade was also fulfilled.
Well, Kawhi said that he was only going to go to the Clippers if they could get PG.
Exactly.
So essentially, Kawhi just made a power move to get both of them onto the same team, similar to what LeBron did with Bosh and Wade.
And on the other LA team, Anthony Davis the previous year had asked out of New Orleans, and we remember that year in New Orleans, his final year in New Orleans, where despite being the best player by far on the team, he did not finish games. He sat out fourth quarters, and then we all remember on the last game of the season where he had the "That's all, folks" T-shirt. So again, that was on the opposite side in the other LA team, where he ended up going to the Los Angeles Lakers and joined up with LeBron James. Moving on to James Harden, which we mentioned, he basically put on a fat suit. He
might bust it out again, yo.
Yeah, he got fat. He played bad in Houston after. I mean, granted, his entire team was basically gone, and it was a huge project that he was playing with at that point. But he did basically quit on his team, as we mentioned, similar to Vince Carter. And that's what led to the trade to the Brooklyn Nets. And at the same time as well, I guess later on, Ben Simmons. We've talked about Ben Simmons numerous times on this on the show.
To be honest, too many.
But I think he was notable for being. Not only did he quit on his team, but I think he's notable for being the first player in my memory to use mental health as an excuse. Now, granted, I'm not going to say he was completely had no mental health issues, but I mean, that was a real cop-out for a guy who basically just was lazy his entire time in Philadelphia, did not want to work on his game. He did get injured, granted, but again, he never showed any sort of improvement and is the exact same player, if not worse than what he was when he came into the league. And so it was an excuse for a guy who never wanted to work.
He also had a massive contract.
Exactly, and never lived up to the contract that they gave him.
And ultimately, it stemmed from the fact that a decision that he didn't make, he made by not taking a layup that's wide open in a playoff series that ultimately costed the Sixers, and the Sixers have still yet to make a conference finals. That was probably their best opportunity. So,
and again, he got mad that everyone was calling him out for that. But again, when you constantly on a daily basis show that you're too lazy to improve, despite being one of, I don't know, the top 10 most talented guys in the league by far.
He has potential, a ton of potential, but you gotta show that you're improving in some capacity. And the thing with Ben Simmons is that his biggest weakness was the jumper. We never saw him even take a jumper. This guy wasn't even looking at the rim. He didn't even look to take a layup. So how do you show that you're improving if you're not? Even if you say, hey, I'm in the gym, I'm working and stuff, you got to show it at some point.
And James Harden, Ben Simmons' stories are intertwined within the Brooklyn Nets saga, where, Kyrie asked out of Brooklyn because he was constantly out of action. And Brooklyn, as a result, did not want to pay him a max contract. And he was like, okay, let me get me out of here. And right when he asked for a trade, KD, right after signing his extension, also asked for a trade. And as we remember, James Harden famously asked for a trade prior to that. Though, again, I don't think anybody blames James Harden for that particular trade request. Though,
well, he only wanted to go to the Sixers.
It factors into the pattern that has become the second half of James Harden's career.
And the Kyrie KD situation, I mean, they basically planned to go to the same team together. Yes, they were both free agents, but they essentially were like, hey, we want to go play together. Let's go.
There was that All-Star game video.
Yeah, they clearly tampered. And again, it's not like it's anything new. Everyone tampers in the NBA, but they denied it, and then they ended up on the same team together, and then they wanted to get James Harden as well. So, yeah, that was a big player empowerment move, quote unquote.
And I mean, again, as we mentioned, that brings us to today, where James Harden has publicly asked for a trade, publicly lambasted his president, saying that he's never gonna, play for him again, that he's a liar.
No, we're not defending Daryl Morey here. Exactly. Daryl Morey did do him wrong. Most likely he did him wrong. We don't know for sure. We don't know all the details, but we're not defending Daryl Morey. But you don't do that. He's at the end of the day, Daryl Morey is your boss.
And again, don't forget Damian Lillard. The Damian Lillard situation is also ongoing, where after years of saying loyalty this, loyalty that, loyalty this, I'm the most loyal person in the NBA. He asked out. And then not only does he ask out, he asked for one specific team that really cannot trade for him outright.
After signing a Supermax.
Exactly.
But listen, I'll defend Dame on one front. the fact that he wanted to be there and he wanted to win there. The organization also let him down on that front. Now, him signing the Supermax and then asking out is what I have an issue with. Because, again, how do you expect the team to facilitate a fair trade? And we'll talk about this a little later. If you sign a Supermax level deal and basically make it next to impossible for any team to acquire you without gutting their entire team.
And, I mean, so as you guys can probably figure out, we're not necessarily the most supportive of this new era, especially the kind of power that players wield. But to play both sides, to play the devil's advocate, we listed as a number of, I think, pros, a number of benefits that this new era has brought to the NBA. So we'll just list those off just for, I guess, argument's sake. Number one, I think most importantly, is that it creates more interest for the average fan. As we mentioned, the NBA is basically a drama for men. And this player empowerment era, like, again, we're in a dead period of the NBA saga, and we're still talking about a topic like this. This would not be possible in any other era, but here we are, right? So it generates more revenue, more clicks, more engagement for the NBA.
A lot of that has to do with social media, I will say. Like that, a lot of that, because of the social media, that's why it's been the most prevalent and the most prominent, but like it definitely makes things interesting. Like, I cannot lie, NBA free agency and trade deadlines are a lot more interesting because it's like you never know where a player is going to end up. So I would say for a fan, it is definitely, there is that element of fun. And I think for the media, they have stuff to talk about. Stirs up controversy and topics. I mean, it helps us out a lot.
It keeps the bills going.
It definitely does. But yeah, it's definitely been a pro that it makes things, the NBA, it gets people talking about the NBA. Now, whether or not it's good or bad, I mean, in terms of press, there's no such thing as bad press.
Exactly.
So, that's what one good thing about this era.
And I think the most important point that pro player empowerment people, harp on constantly is the fact that, and for regular people, if they don't want to do a job, then they shouldn't be forced to do a job. Players basically should choose where they want to work, especially when the organization can literally trade you whenever they want without any warning. As we remember, Harrison Barnes literally got traded in the middle of a game.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, the thing is, when the organization can trade you wherever they want.
Whenever.
Yeah, wherever, whenever they want. The question is, why can't players do the same? I think, as I mentioned, I think this is the most valid point in terms of the pro player empowerment.
It's the human element.
Exactly. Players have their families, they have, let's say, their families, their kids settled in a school, and at moment's notice, having to pick up their kids or family and move somewhere like across the country. It does get difficult for players. We have to be honest. So I think, as I mentioned, I think this is the most legitimate point in terms of supporting the argument of player empowerment.
Yeah, I think that to me is probably the most valid point, and I would say, even from if you think about it from in just us normal people's perspective, it's like, if I want if my boss ends up telling me, hey, I want you to move across the country to right away to do the same job, it's like we're gonna be like, wait, what? Like what? I got a life here, I got a family here, I gotta go find a place to live. It's a whole other business. Why can't I, as a player, choose where I want to work and where I want to settle and be in the best situation for myself? So from that standpoint, you definitely have to understand where the players are coming from.
And in terms of the guaranteed contracts of the NBA, I think this is what a lot of fans feel angry about. The NBA giving such good contracts to the players, while their players kind of pull stuff like what James Harden, for example, Damian Lillard are pulling. However, I think on the other side of the argument is the fact that you don't really want this turning the complete opposite way, where teams have too much power, and you essentially turn it into an NFL where the players a lot of times in the NFL don't get treated the best, to say the least. And
shout out Jonathan Taylor.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jonathan Taylor is a recent example. But I think as well, you want to strike a balance of, you don't want to swing the pendulum too much to one side where, again, you become the NFL. Again, granted, the NFL is a bit of a different story. You have 53 guaranteed players, whatever, it's a bit different. But I think the point is, people also don't want it to be completely that way either.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a balance, and we'll kind of talk about this a little later on about, if like how could there potentially be any solutions to this situation. But yeah, ultimately, you at least a positive for this player empowerment movement is that it's not too one-sided. Like, it's not like the owners control everything. The players are able to kind of are able to do things and are able to kind of have a voice. And, the NBPA is a very big presence in the NBA and how the CBA and how things are negotiated. It's not that case for for other sports. In a lot of cases, for example, the NHL, Gary Bettman literally controls that thing and has been doing so since 1993. And somehow they extended him. The NHL is weird. But yeah, definitely is a positive that it's not the NFL or any other sport like that. Now, flipping the script over to the cons, and I think this is where the side of the spectrum where Zeeshan and I kind of lean towards for a few reasons. And I would say the first con that comes out of the player empowerment era is the fact that loyalty doesn't exist anymore. Like, not even just loyalty to the teams, but loyalty to the fans. And I'm going to first speak from the fans' perspective, because at the end of the day, Zeeshan and I are both fans. We go and we spend our hard-earned money, we spend our time to watch these players play, to invest in our favorite teams, and to really cheer for something to be built and grow. I think one of the best things I can respect from the Warriors system is the fact that they drafted all their main three guys, they grew them, and they got players. I didn't like the KD stuff, I will say that much, but everything else about their system, the fact that they got a coach, they organized a culture, a system, everything just felt so natural and progressive. That's something that fans love. They love to be able to get excited and cheer for their team every single year. But the fact of the matter is that as fans nowadays, every offseason, we don't know if our favorite player is going to stay or leave, ask out, or even want to be here anymore.
And it's interesting you mentioned the Warriors situation because, again, we remember their I guess not technically their new fan base, but the Oakland fan base as a whole has been one of the most loyal and supportive fan bases of the Warriors. And for the majority, literally before Steph Curry got there, they were being complete trash. The Warriors have been terrible. And yet they were still rewarded by fans. And as a result, it worked out with them. And they got a really loyal superstar in Steph Curry who elevated that franchise to a new level. Will that happen anymore in this new era? Is that going to ever happen again? Again, it's questionable.
And I won't even say it's all on the players' fault. Even teams. Like, there are players that want to be in certain situations, a la DeMar DeRozan, a la Pascal Siakam, and just the recent names I can bring up, that want to be in their current situation. But somehow the business of the NBA dictates that, you gotta shift things around. So there's definitely no loyalty anywhere. And then if I want to tie things to just load management as a whole, when fans pay money to see players play, and the fact that they don't even play or can dictate when they want to show up for work after earning as much money as they do, definitely seems a little bit disrespectful and a little bit of a slap to the face to the hard-earned hardworking people that earn, pay to be there and pay to see these players. So that's definitely the first con. The second one is it ruins relationships. I would say nobody is happy in these sort of player empowerment situations. If a player asks out, the owners are mad that the players keep taking money and not staying with their team. What's really a contract anymore? The owners are definitely frustrated by that. But then they also get mad at the GMs, and the GMs are mad because they're forced to make deals that they don't want to make. When you have a superstar player, you want to keep him. You want to try to build, try to do what you can, try to do your job to put a contender around that player. And when the player just asks out and basically lights all the work you did on fire, it's like, well, of course he's going to be mad. And the players are mad because they're not getting what they want. So everybody is mad in this situation. And ultimately, these situations are usually resolved by somebody being, somebody happy and the other two parties not.
The main example is a guy like James Harden and his relationship with Daryl Morey, right? They famously have had a really good relationship for a long time. And now that's seemingly being, blown up.
Yeah, and again, ultimately, and that's the part that I think will need to be solved, is that there's no situation where everybody can end up happy. Somebody is going to be mad, and I think that's been a problem. And then I also touched upon this earlier, but I will say this again, but the fact that the players are getting paid so much money now, and yet they still want everything catered to them, is becoming more and more of a problem. Like, for example, the Damian Lillard situation. You can't tell me that you can't sign a supermax level deal, which, first off, the criteria involves you being part of an organization for, I think 7-8 years. I think that's the minimum. and then earning All NBA, being like a superstar player, essentially proving your loyalty to that team, your reward is the supermax. So by signing this and then asking out or demanding things to be or players to be added in here and there, so it makes things so difficult for a general manager or a team to accommodate all this stuff.
As we mentioned, the supermax is a failure.
Oh, absolutely.
They clearly, the players' union obviously fought for it to be included in this new CBA agreement. But as we've mentioned, basically since the supermax was instituted, it has not been a good thing for anybody except for the player getting paid.
And they're fully guaranteed money. So the fact of the matter is, even if the player sits out, they will still get they'll still get all that money, regardless of wherever they go, wherever they end up. They'll still end up getting that money. So it's definitely been a negative point to the fact that the players can get paid so much and still ask for more and more. And I would also say that it also factors into, to the next con, which is the fact that it's hard to build teams. It is. From the reality of the fact that the players can literally do whatever they want. One day they'll want to be on the team. The next day you didn't bring their best friend leaves the team and now they want out. Like, it makes it so hard for a team. And also the fact that even when the superstar wants out, it's usually going to be an uneven trade because the star doesn't have, the team who wants the star, as like the Knicks with Carmelo Anthony, have no leverage because the player wants to go there, and they're like, why should we give up the team trading him would be like, we want full compensation for that player. The team acquiring him would be like, why do we give up that level of compensation? And ultimately there's this back and forth, and usually the team that's acquiring the player ends up losing out. So it's really hard to build teams. And also you can't really develop any young players, because you're constantly trading picks. You're constantly trading prospects to cater to these superstars' demands. So it's very difficult to build something like I mentioned earlier with the Warriors, how you're developing, you're drafting, and you're building a system and a culture to, continue to grow and have a system of players coming in and out. So it's definitely hard to build teams. And I would also say that small market teams are usually worse off, since all the superstars, when they want to ask out, they're usually going from a small market to a big market. It helps their brand, marketability, and also the fact that the big markets attract more free agents. So small markets already are screwed just from the very beginning, the fact that they're smaller markets. But now the fact that even if they do draft a superstar level player, they don't get to keep them for the long haul, a la Anthony Davis with New Orleans, or other, you can go down the list with other examples.
And I mean, granted, a lot of these small market team examples really failed the players in terms of building around them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's also, a balanced equation where they're not able to get the right help for players because of the exact reason we talked about.
Yeah, it's there's faults all around. Like, I would say, like Damian Lillard's situation is a perfect example of that. I mean, you're making like $50-60 million. So what cap space do you have left to go get another superstar?
And again, no disrespect to Portland, but who wants to really go to Portland?
Well, it's rainy. It's it's cloudy. It's the Pacific Northwest. I mean, it's just what it is. So yeah, small market teams usually to get the short end of the stick. And I'd say the last big con that has come out of the player empowerment movement has been load management. Now, yes, Kawhi Leonard was the catalyst of this movement, and this was a byproduct of Greg Popovich doing it with the big three in San Antonio. Resting players on given nights on back-to-backs and keeping them fresh.
Famously remember when I think it was 2013 where there was a huge matchup between Miami and San Antonio at the end of the season, and Greg Popovich arrested the whole starting lineup, and so they got fined for that. But I think that was the tipping point of when people first started to really notice what would eventually be called load management. But yeah, as we mentioned, Greg Popovich was kind of the guy that really started it all.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that, for Kawhi said he was injured and stuff, and that's why he was sitting, but clearly the Spurs didn't really handle that the right way. But I think the Raptors really pioneered the load management, the true essence of load management of what we know it as today, where, with Kawhi, they allowed him to rest multiple games, which widespread the trend throughout the league. And you can argue this approach enabled Kawhi Leonard, who hasn't been healthy since, to play his best postseason of his career. I mean, he put up a Jordan-esque postseason run that ended up with a championship. So was it worth it for the Raptors side? Absolutely. But other teams were like, hey, if you guys can do it, why not we do it with our superstars? And the last person who was really responsible for this was Ben Simmons. I mean, now, yes, he did get hurt. He didn't injure his back. But the fact that there's many games where he just sat out, the mental health,
Well, I mean, like
issues.
Kawhi with load management, Ben Simmons basically used load management to quit.
Yeah. Like, then it became like a leverage thing where, like, a player like, well, okay, if you're not going to do what I want, I'm just going to sit out for a game. And there's nothing a coach can do. It's not like the coach can literally just push the guy out there, And there's only so much the NBA can fine a player. So, yeah, it's Ben Simmons really did, help facilitate what players use load management for
He
today.
took it up to the next level, I think.
Yeah, he evolved it. If we're talking about a Squirtle versus I'm forgetting my Pokemon, man. This is a bad reference, but you get the idea. But yeah, the load management is definitely a problem, and I think again it ties back to my first point about the fans, where the fact is that some of these fans only get to see these players maybe once a year, and if you're sitting out those days, it's a big slap in the face of people that pay their hard-earned money to see you play and put money in your pocket. So yeah, definitely. Those were some of the main cons. Now there might have been some more we could talk about, but yeah, those were some of the pros and cons that we wanted to bring up. But now let's forward the conversation to what could be done about this player empowerment era. Now there are some good things, but you can clearly see there is an imbalance. There is more bad than there is good. So what could the NBA do? I would say the first option that the NBA could look into is, and they're starting to kind of look into this, is put on some sort of cap on players' contracts, or some sort of clause that states that if you make more than X amount of money, your team has full control over you, or they can dictate what they want to do with you, something of that nature. Now, this would incentivize, rather than players making a huge cap hit, they can get more like performance bonuses rather than making $60 million. You can make $30 million with essentially $20 million of performance bonuses, something of that line. The NHL actually does that a lot in their league, where they give up a lot of a lot of signing bonuses in their contracts, so that the cap hits are actually a lot more reasonable. This also allows more trades to be facilitated, because now cap hits are a lot more reasonable. You can trade players relatively easily and get fair compensation involved. Or an alternative option, piggybacking off this option, would be to put a minimum number of years or games played that a player has to serve before being eligible to ask for a trade. Now, this would apply to like longer term deals. I would say to 3 or more years on the deal, where you have to play an X amount of years or an X amount of games. Then you'll be able to ask for a trade, which I think is fair for both sides. It helps reestablish a contract being an actual contract, something that's binding, but also giving the players an option to go to a better destination if they want to, and the teams will have time to facilitate. So so that's one option that could work. I would say another option the NBA could consider is putting heavier fines on players who miss games with no legit reasons, or fine players for egregious situations like Ben Simmons.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like one of the main. They've kind of done this a little bit. Obviously, they fined Ben Simmons. I forget how many. What was it, 100,000 or whatever?
But he made some of it.
But he made some of it back. But again, like we mentioned, there has to be some sort of penalty for. It's one thing to ask for a trade. It's another thing to do what, for example, as we mentioned, Ben Simmons did, right? So egregious situations, I think, would have to have some sort of penalties. Now, again, this would need some sort of judicial system. For example, like in the NHL, they have a judicial system when it comes to, agreeing on contracts in the offseason. There would have to be some sort of similar kind of system in place. Obviously, the NBPA would, fight all of that as well. But the point is there has to be some sort of middle ground or common ground where, the players are willing to accept some sort of penalty that the owners stipulate for situations like, I don't know, Ben Simmons, like James Harden, like Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, so they're definitely the NBA and putting in more fines. I mean, James Harden was just slapped with $100,000 fine for his comments in China, and the fact is the guy made like what $35 million last season. He's set to make $37 million this season. What's $100,000 to a guy like that? You need more for those type of situations. The next solution would be obviously to abolish the supermax. I think this has done more harm than good. And yes, players want their money. I'm not advocating against that. What I am saying is that supermax has to go. I'm sorry, because it strings teams too much to the point where they have no options. They can't do anything. They can't move players. And if players want to be able to dictate where they want to go, they have to give in some regard.
And I mean, I think it failed in its purpose. The purpose of the Supermax was to incentivize
Yeah.
players to stay with smaller market teams. That has not really worked out.
Yeah.
Instead, it's been players literally grabbing the Supermax money and doing whatever they want.
Players found a loophole. Like, that's essentially what they did. They found a loophole in the system. So, yeah, getting rid of the Supermax will definitely help balance things out a little bit more. And the last solution that we thought of was, to put some restrictions on a team's ability to create super teams. Now, this is something the NBA has or will be starting to implement with the new CBA that has taken into effect, that will be taking into effect, where now there's going to be a second apron of tax that a team will have to pay if they're going to pay more than that threshold.
It essentially kind of acts as a hard cap.
Yeah.
Nobody really wants to violate that hard cap.
Yeah, because then it limits a team's abilities to have things like the mid-level exception or the biannual and some of these exceptions that allow teams to make other roster moves to improve their team. This makes now teams more cognizant of, okay, we have to balance out our contracts and maybe split out the salary cap a lot better in order to make a balanced roster from top to bottom. Now, these are just some solutions. Obviously, there could be more. But overall, the player empowerment era has definitely been interesting for the NBA. Now, I said it earlier, I'm not completely against player empowerment. I think it's a good thing that the NBA is not like a league like the NFL, where a player can't do anything they want to do. But at the same time, I think there needs to be balance. I think there needs to be a shift back, to the left, for lack of a metaphor. Where right now it's too far to the right, we got to shift it right back to the middle to kind of get that happy medium. So everybody is happy. And I think when everybody is happy in the organization and the players, you'll get a better product on the court and the fans will be happy subsequently. But we'll have to see what happens. Let us know what you guys think. Do you like the player empowerment era, or do you think it has ruined the NBA? Let us know what you think either in the comment section on YouTube or on social media. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course here on YouTube. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss more great episodes from us, or even episode clips that we upload as well. Also follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at _N_podcast. We also post clips on our Instagram account, certain things that, some breaking news or some things that we want to get them quick thoughts on. We create a clip on our Instagram, so definitely follow us there and follow our Twitter for updates on the show. Or is it X now? I don't know what Elon wanted me to call it.
I think everyone's still calling it Twitter.
I'm calling it Twitter. Sorry, Elon. You can suck it. Don't change something that was already good. So yeah, follow us there for all the updates. Also, check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's an essential hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode. So if you don't have time to listen or watch the full thing, you can read about it on our website. Every episode is posted with the video, audio, and the written version all in one place. Definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, gonna continue on with the dry period of the NBA for a little bit longer. We do have the Rico Hines runs. We are seeing some footage of players actually working out. So we're getting closer to preseason. But man, I hate the dry period.
Yep.
It definitely sucks. But hey, who knows? Maybe there'll be a breaking trade that'll get us excited again. We never know with the NBA. But
it is a drama.
It definitely is a drama. But with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys all in the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.